this is an N of one, for an individual patient treatment, right? They're taking your cancer, they are running a bunch of sequencing and diagnostics on it. They're identifying things that are expressed uniquely in your particular cancer cell that the rest of your body does not express. And then they're encoding that into the vaccine and saying, okay, go attack, immune system. Like, these are the things that you need to go identify and attack. And they can do this apparently with like north of 30 different targets, which is pretty amazing. One being that the targets are identified specifically for you, and they should be highly selective. And there's 30 targets, because sometimes what will happen, I guess, with these cancer cells is they'll escape the targeting of one surface protein by somehow not expressing that. They'll evolve, right? They'll mutate, whatever. They'll randomly not express that protein on the surface anymore, and then they can evade a drug that is the mechanism of which is based on the targeting of that one protein. So the ability to identify 30 different targets and program that all into a single vaccine, gives you a lot in terms of redundancy. How accurate, and I guess there's also the question of like, what's the bottleneck? Are we able to predict where things are going to happen, but we can't necessarily communicate with the precision we'd like? Or
one is forecasting. Depending upon the disaster type, and most natural disasters are broken down into a notice or no notice, and I think we can start to prescribe them. But think about a hurricane as a notice incident, a tornado, earthquake, less notice. It's not no notice, but less notice. So one is using some of the more advanced predictive analytics tools to get better warnings. We now live in a time where even if you saw some of the coverage in Venezuela for the earthquake, Google Alerts was able to send out a 5 to 8 second, I think it was about 8 second notification of an earthquake that was coming. And well, that doesn't sound like a lot of time. That really is a significant amount of time. We're talking about an ability to warn someone to get into a safe location. So I think it's one is doing analytics overall, excuse me, to make better predictions and have the warning capability. Then the question comes of what do you do with that information? How do you get it so where you can geolocate a very specific area? So let's say your grandma lives in one county, but we expect the storm to be on the north side of that county and not the south side. Can you dial in that alert and warning to the point where it's just targeting the very specific exposed population? And that's hard.
What are you seeing in terms of adoption, and like what are maybe some of your favorite app layer, creative use cases, new possibilities that are opening up as a result of the foundational technology that you're?
Yeah, so I think that when we think about voice, a lot of times we think about ChatGPT voice in the app, or other sort of like AI-based apps, but where a lot of the actual revenue in the voice AI space is coming from is from telephony. And you'd be surprised at some of the verticals that are really sort of moving very, very quickly to voice AI, because it's always there in the middle of the night. You don't have to have an answering service or this sort of thing. It can be very different. Collections is actually a place where voice AI, where they have voice AI making calls to people who are behind on desks, is actually a use case that works quite well. And in things where in-home check-in on patients, in-home check-in on seniors, like that, there are a lot of cases where voice AI really is providing an enormous value for the.
I have a friend who is the CTO of a mid-size e-commerce company. And he says all of his product managers now bring in Replit demos immediately for feedback. And they do not ask the tech team to now it's like instantaneous. All product managers use Replit, and they build out the feature and they demo the feature during the meeting. And you can immediately see it and decide whether or not it's deployed to production or not. That is what Replit has done, especially because they integrate it inside, a security stack, and that is one of the major things. So it's really a tool for PMs to become developers and not developers to develop on their own. which is, I think, the key differentiation. Good morning. It is Wednesday, August 19th, 9:01 a.m. Nathan, good morning. How are you this morning?
Good morning. I'm good. It's a great day in human history. We got cancer breakthroughs coming online and a lot of consumer surplus downstream of that, I think. And was pretty interested to see a whole cell simulation model drop yesterday from Gen Bio as well. So happy to get into more of those in detail, but tell me what's on your mind first.
I saw the Anthropic announcement yesterday on they had Claude run some research, and basically they found binders, protein binders. So what the gist of it was that in order to design a drug, a lot of drugs need to attach to proteins. In order to attach to those proteins, you need a particular shape. And the better that kind of Lego block fits together, the better, the drug binds and the more effective the drug is. And one of the big challenges is that, these are very complex, very structured proteins, and it's hard to find a binder that works well. And they had Claude design binders for, I think, 16 or 19 different types of proteins. And Claude did a good job. I will note, though, that the announcement was almost universally panned by bio people, and the overall take was that, okay, great, but I saw someone from I think Patrick Collison has ARC Institute that they fund, and I saw someone from the ARC Institute say that, okay, it's great that Claude was there, but Claude used like 5 different open weights models, which are protein centric, and so it's not as though Claude designed. Claude had the knowledge to design from scratch. Claude just used, was like an interface that used these other specialized models. So, and a lot of bio people in general, bio people are very negative on any bio research, not just AI research, but any bio research, because the end product has to be a drug, and drugs are rare and far between. Like the average big pharma company probably gets out maybe 1 to 2 drugs a year out of a million candidates. So drug people are universally kind of pessimistic on drug development, that especially when non-specialists enter the field. So anyway, I thought that was interesting in the sense that they panned it, so.
Yeah, it feels like they're kind of in a coping zone in the same way that, maybe mathematicians were until not too long ago when certain things became undeniable.
Mhm.
I mean, it's definitely true that Claude used these other specialist models, but I don't think that means it's a non-event. I mean, this is what specialists have to do, right? I couldn't do this. Like, I have a conceptual kind of framework level understanding of what is done and how these specialist models are strung together in pipelines, and you kind of generate the shape, and then you got to generate it in more refinement, and then you use other models to check to see if it seems like it is actually going to bind and the way you want to, and all this sort of, if it works really well, gets you hopefully a lot higher accuracy in terms of your guesses of what's actually worth moving over to wet lab work for verification. And it seems like it does sometimes work really well for that. But there's, similarly to how there's not that many people in the world that can really even understand these math results that are coming out at this point, let alone do them. We have a similar bottleneck in biology where there's just not that many people who can do this kind of stuff. And even the biologists who understand it well, like everyone else, are a little slow to adopt, and they're not programmers by training, and they could use Claude to do the programming, and now we've got Claude just kind of stitching together the whole pipeline. So I do think it's a fairly big deal. It will mean that we're going to be constrained by the quality of these specialist models, as opposed to being constrained by the number of people who can use the specialist models. And I don't know necessarily, maybe that was already a constraint to an extent, but it does seem like really dramatically increasing the amount of use that the specialist models get creates a lot of opportunity for them to get better, right? I mean, the iteration is in a meaningful way downstream of use for a lot of these things. So, and we know that Anthropic is also hiring and investing in actual wet lab capacity. So, as a nod and kind of foreshadowing of our second guest today, we're going to have the head of Realtime AI from OpenAI on to discuss their new real-time voice mode. We can potentially have Q join us for that conversation as well. But I was talking to OpenAI voice mode last night about all this kind of stuff. And it sure seems like, certainly with the resources that they have, the ability to tighten that feedback loop and do like incremental, find the places in the models where there's, either for whatever reason, data gaps or, whatever kind of ultimate root cause of the problem is. What seems to be expected now is if you optimize too hard against the specialist models, what you'll end up with is artifacts, because they're definitely not perfect. And, if you just optimize for the score on a single, that's why people use pipelines too, right? Because hopefully the different models have different weaknesses. And if they all score something highly, that's certainly a much stronger indication than if they just get one high score. But it kind of reminded me a little bit of jailbreaking in a sense, where if you really go optimizing super hard without getting to that real world feedback, you end up just finding places where the model is overly optimistic and it doesn't really play out very well. But I suspect that that's probably exactly what Anthropic is going to do. And they're going to identify all those places. They're going to actually run the experiments, which if you have a cloud lab, sounds like it's not that expensive to do on the margin. Like the throughput is starting to get pretty good on some of these fairly standardized experimental platforms. And, finding and testing and then patching the gaps in these specialist models seems like there's a lot of opportunity to hill climb in the relatively short term, as they now are in a position to kind of put the whole thing together end to end, from agents running the pipelines themselves and generating the hypotheses, and then on the back end actually doing stuff in cloud labs. It seems like Dario's got a few tricks up his sleeve that I am definitely very interested to see. I mean, as always, I have kind of the mixed feelings on this, where I'm like, it's going to be so awesome. And at the same time, yikes, we are creating some potentially unwieldy tools here. But
So
you can see the
one
whole
of
thing
the
coming together.
one of the really funny things was that the Anthropic team posted the entire prompt that they used. And one of the key pieces of the prompt is, please don't do any biological warfare.
Make no mistakes on that, Claude.
Make,
For
make
sure.
no mistakes on that. Please do not do any biological warfare while you're at this.
Yeah. Well, hey, just in case it was unclear,
Do not kill your host organism.
I mean, it's it is the thing that they have put into the Constitution with most force, right? That this is like, it should never be, because we had this problem with the internet issue with the last round of revelations, right? It was like, we told Claude it didn't have access to the internet, and then when it found it did, it rationalized to itself that this must be a simulation because it was told that it didn't have access, and so how else could it understand this? That's a little bit problematic unto itself, but that does give you a sense of why they've made this exception in the Constitution for don't do biological warfare, because even if you think it's right, or even if you've been talked into it, or even if you think you're just in a simulation, This does seem like one of those hard rules that we should really reinforce with every lever that we have. And so it's goofy, I guess, but that's the world we live in. It's got to be reiterated in the system prompt as well.
Yeah, so let's maybe let's quickly cover what the other big news, which is Moderna, right? So there was a big announcement this morning. Moderna and Merck together. So Merck has a blockbuster cancer drug, and Moderna has a cancer vaccine. And what they did was a combination of the cancer drug and the cancer vaccine. The cancer drug to basically kill or reduce the cancer, and the cancer vaccine to prevent it from coming back. And so the combination of those two was powerful enough that the stage 3, and it's a stage 3, so phase 3. So if you're not familiar with biotech, phase 1 is kind of biological safety. Phase 2 is efficacy, and then efficacy at small scale, and phase 3 is efficacy at large scale. And you need to pass through phase 3 in order for you to actually get a license from the FDA to basically distribute the drug. And Moderna and Merck went through this process for both drugs, for the drug and vaccine combo together. And it was so effective that it became unethical to not give the combo to the patients in the placebo group. And so when this happens, when they notice that the patients who are receiving the drug are doing so well, at some point it becomes unethical not to give the placebo group the same combo, and they stopped the trial early. So they stopped the trial early. It was very effective, and so all the placebo patients can get it as well. And it's pretty amazing news.
Yeah, it's awesome. I think for calibration on like what role did AI play in this, my guess is probably not a huge amount. I mean, Moderna has been a fairly aggressive early adopter, and they've done like famous contracts, as they've kind of positioned themselves as a leader in agent adoption. But this work goes back a while, and I think probably we can credit humans mostly for this, with maybe a little bit of AI acceleration on the margin. I'd be interested to know, if there's really even any. But if there was any, I would guess it would have to be at the level of like greasing the wheels on the clinical trial market, for example. I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit still in terms of just systematically going through patient profiles and trying to match them more effectively to clinical trials. So things like that, I could see very kind of late stage process work having potentially been aided by all the AIs that we talk about all the time. But the core R&D on this has obviously been in the pipeline for a lot longer. But then it does also seem like the kind of thing that AIs will be able to use well, in the same way that Claude using these narrow models. This is something that it is. So a couple key facts, right, that really make it potentially in combination with this other Claude story, I think, kind of paint a little bit of a picture of where things are going. This is an N of 1, for an individual patient treatment, right? They're taking your cancer, they are running a bunch of sequencing and diagnostics on it. They're identifying things that are expressed uniquely in your particular cancer cell that the rest of your body does not express. And then they're encoding that into the vaccine and saying, okay, go attack, immune system. Like, these are the things that you need to go identify and attack. And they can do this apparently with like north of 30 different targets, which is pretty amazing. When my son had immunotherapy, he had a similar, benefit where this goes back a number of years, but the clinical trial that validated the immunotherapy that he got was also ended early because it was so effective that for ethical reasons, they called it and started giving it to everybody. And that targets just one protein, on the surface of a particular cell type. And in his case, it was a B cell cancer, and the immune system then takes out functionally all of your B cells. So you lose not just the cancerous B cells, but you also lose the healthy B cells. So that creates additional side effects. It creates a longer recovery time, makes him more vulnerable. He might have to get revaccinated for stuff. So this is like advantaged in two ways. One being that the targets are identified specifically for you, and they should be highly selective. And there's 30 targets, because sometimes what will happen, I guess, with these cancer cells is they'll escape the targeting of one surface protein by somehow not expressing that. They'll evolve, right? They'll mutate, whatever. They'll randomly not express that protein on the surface anymore, and then they can evade a drug that is the mechanism of which is based on the targeting of that one protein. So the ability to identify 30 different targets and program that all into a single vaccine gives you a lot in terms of redundancy. And it's really interesting to me. I'm like, how it sounds so good in some ways. I'm like, how did it only reduce mortality by half? But cancer is complicated, but half is a huge needle mover, obviously. Now, how Claude, I think, can really start to use this, you can imagine, right? This is a programmable platform. And I think this is one of the more compelling insights for Machines of Living Grace. Dario, who has this big, background in biology, says that biology typically advances by the discovery of these platform technologies that become a kind of programmable way to intervene in a biological system. And once you have that, then you can start to explore it in all different kinds of ways, and it really opens up all kinds of new frontiers. So this is the kind of thing that you would certainly expect a Claude, or if not this Claude, then certainly a Claude coming soon, should be able to take the raw information directly out of your test results and do this kind of design. So I don't know to what degree that's a bottleneck. They probably already have that automated to some degree, but I would expect that the pipelines they have for automating that kind of work right now are fairly bespoke, fairly kind of purpose built. And thank you. Personalized vaccines much better than personalized cancer. Q. But you can imagine, what we've seen in math is that the models are getting really good at taking these techniques from one subdomain and moving it over to a different subdomain, recognizing where it can apply and reusing it. So this seems like the kind of thing that you could imagine being reused like quite broadly. And it'll, I'm sure, take some time for that to happen. Nothing in biology happens super fast, but I thought it was a really exciting announcement, obviously. And the fact that, Claude and Sol and Astra and everything else will be able to really push, where are all the possible places that something like this could be applied, I think does give you a lot more reason to think it could be impactful well beyond just right now they have one indication. They do have trials running in a bunch of other cancer types as well. I'm an optimistic person. I'm optimistic that it'll work for these other cancer types too. Obviously, we'll have to get that data. But just the incredibly highly programmable nature of this, I think, is super exciting.
One thing that has always struck me about the idea of personalized cancer vaccines is that it is a manufacturing problem to some extent. It's about manufacturing in small quantity, very highly sophisticated manufacturing pipeline. And it strikes me is that that is the kind of thing that China would be good at, like reducing the pricing on. And I can imagine, for example, them just going like, all right, this is what we're going to do. We're going to manufacture these cancer vaccines at the lowest cost for everyone in China. Forget about the world, right? Just everyone in China. And that in itself is, significant enough, because 1/8 of the, 1/6 or 1/8 of the global population, that's enough to provide cheap cancer vaccines for everyone in the world. So because I do not have faith that the U.S. companies will be able to. They're not in the business of manufacturing large scale at low cost, right? They're in the business of like maximizing margin so that they can use that margin to develop new drugs. So I think that hope is really going to be that manufacturing at large scale is going to be a Chinese probably thing rather than an American thing. So.
Just one more reason to try to be friends with the Chinese. The stock pop on this was $50 billion between Moderna and Merck, roughly. And I was just thinking, boy, that does imply an awful lot of consumer surplus. I mean, my son's treatment was, roughly speaking, over the course of 6 months, estimated at, you can never get to ground truth on this stuff, but I just asked ChatGPT to estimate what it would cost to do all this treatment. And the answer came back something like between $500,000 and $1.25 million. And I suspect it was probably on the high side of that because we were in the hospital a lot. So that's the cost to treat cancer, $1 million. That's when it goes well, right? And he hasn't had a recurrence, hasn't had to go back. Basically everything went according to plan. $50 billion divided by 1 million is 50,000. So if you could prevent, 50,000 recurrences where all of a sudden somebody goes from, seeming like they were okay to, oh shit, it came back. Now they've got a whole, massive journey in front of them again that's going to cost $1 million to the system, obviously, plus all their pain and suffering. If you can do that for 50,000 people, you can save the system $50 billion. Mm-hmm. And that's the amount of value that they seem to have captured on day one. So my guess is in the fullness of time, this mm-hmm. R&D pays off for society at a ratio that's like, easily an order of magnitude higher than what they've captured. And, I could easily imagine it being a couple orders of magnitude more than what they've captured because there's a lot of cancer out there. 50,000, it's a big country. It's a big world. 50,000 people is not that many in the mm-hmm. grand scheme of, how many people are getting treated for these kinds of diseases on an annual basis. Even my son's one cancer type, has like a couple thousand a year. It's fairly rare.
I will note one thing though. So I was an investor in a prenatal genetics testing company, and so they would test for these kind of rare genetic diseases before you had a baby, and the intent was that okay, once you recognize that you have a rare genetic disease between the both of you. You can then do pre-implantation. You can then do embryo selection. They can test the embryo before implantation, and then they can implant the embryo which does not have the genetic disease. Now, the problem with that was that when you implant, an embryo, the chance of premature birth increases. So the chance that you're going to have a premature infant increases. In the U.S. Medical system, a premature infant costs roughly about $1.5 million right now. And so the cost of savings of in the healthcare system of not taking care of people with these rare genetic diseases gets offset by the increase because you have a larger increase in the number of premature births, and it almost kind of like evens off. So I think there's the healthcare system is a tough place to be because of these kind of trade-offs between the two, and it's not clear to me that, for example, it may be, again, I don't want to be like such a pessimist or whatever, but it may be that it turns out that a lot of healthcare spending is in the last kind of 2 years of life is a lot of the healthcare spending, and so you could have these kind of cancer drugs which extend life another 5 years, but then they extend that period of the last final years of suffering to a greater extent. So it's not. I really want to see like better quality of life. Like better quality of life is like all in like good, right? Sometimes the endpoints that just extend life are perhaps like not the greatest endpoint sometimes, because the quality of life in the latter years starts to decline so precipitously. But it's very sensitive, and it is where I think the dollars are being applied to create these new technologies, and that's what we need. You need to incentivize the system to create these cures. But it does take me back to the fact that why a lot of like bio people are so like inherently pessimistic sometimes. It's really quite sad when you go from like AI tech people who are very optimistic, and then you meet the bio people who are like ultra pessimistic, and really do not want to state anything positive unless it's 100% sure it's positive, because there are so many false dawns in the work that they do.
I actually do expect we'll probably end up spending more and more on healthcare, even as these things come in. That I don't think the best argument for it by any means is the savings to the system, because I do agree that we're probably going to find other places to go spend that money. But it is still, I think, remarkable how much value I expect to be created for society versus how much their stock popped on the news. The other thing from Gen Bio, ChatGPT voice last night was kind of playing the role of bio skeptic that you just described, and it was pretty interesting. But I think this is also, one threshold I'm really looking for with this Gen Bio thing. It's like, it's a highly structured model. They've kind of combined a lot of different modalities. They have protein structures represented in spatial terms. They also have the network structure for like what upregulates and downregulates what, and that's a big graph structure, a very incomplete graph structure, because we don't know all those interactions, but what we have is in there. So they have a lot of prior knowledge kind of encoded into the structure. And still, ChatGPT voice was like very skeptically emphasizing they have not proven that this thing really understands causality. It is able to make guesses, but has it learned a bunch of heuristics, or has it really understood deep causal structure? And I was kind of like, well, it has all these structural, kind of echoes of the biology built into its architecture. And ChatGPT was like, well, I'm going to have to kind of see it to believe it. But a threshold I'm really looking for is what will be good enough that it will actually be useful to sort of the Brian Johnsons of the world, or the peptide movement, because those people don't need that same kind of gold standard evidence. And they're willing to, and I'm not among them yet, but they're willing to experiment on themselves. And if they can get value in terms of guiding their own experiments and kind of collecting, a much more diverse set of data, a different kind of data than the system itself is likely to collect, I could see that creating its own feedback process that could exist kind of in parallel to the gold standard of evidence that traditional medicine requires, but could provide a real boost to it over time as well.
Indeed. I am going to go ahead and introduce our first two guests for this morning. So we have with us Jeremy Greenberg and Jessica Jensen. Jeremy spent more than 2 decades on the front lines of federal emergency management, most recently as the director of FEMA's Response Operations Division and the chief of the National Response Coordination Center. In those roles, he acted as the central air traffic controller for the federal government during massive crises, coordinating the deployment of urban search and rescue teams, essential supplies, and interagency support during catastrophic hurricanes, wildfires, and other national emergencies. In June 2025, amid intense political debate over the structure of future disaster response, Greenberg left FEMA. Today, he serves as senior advisor to Aspen Digital and leads the AID initiative, short for AI for Disasters and Emergencies. Backed by the Markle Foundation and the RAND Corporation, AID is a nonpartisan effort dedicated to bringing practical, life-saving artificial intelligence directly to state and local emergency managers. Joining him is Jessica Jensen, a senior policy researcher at the RAND Corporation and one of the country's leading experts at the intersection of artificial intelligence and disaster management. Before joining RAND, Jessica spent 18 years shaping emergency management as a rigorous academic discipline at North Dakota State University, holding a rare PhD in the field and ultimately serving as an endowed full professor. She matters to us right now because emergency management has reached a critical breaking point. Disasters are becoming more frequent, more costly, and increasingly interconnected, what Jessica describes as cascading polycrisis. At this exact same time, the technology sector is flooding the market with artificial intelligence tools that promise to solve everything from wildfire tracking to resource allocation. The AID initiative is a major collaboration between the Markle Foundation, Aspen Digital, and RAND. They recently released a landmark report mapping out over 1,000 AI tools built for emergencies. And they are joining us today to talk about their work. And let me pull them up on screen very quickly. Good morning, Jeremy.
Hey, good morning to you both, and thank you so much for having us on.
Yeah, this is really interesting stuff. 1,179 AI-enabled products from 717 companies you guys covered in this report. That was a surprising number. You know, I see a lot of AI products, but I was really surprised to see that there's that many specifically targeting emergency management and emergency response. Maybe for starters, do you want to just give us a little bit of a flavor of like what is in that bag of 1,000 products? Some examples of things maybe that you think are inspired and are going to make a big difference, and maybe some of the goofier ones that people have dreamed up that you wouldn't necessarily endorse.
I think, Nathan, to your question, and it'll be exciting when Jessica gets on as the lead on the technical side to chat through all these products. But if you guys have had the chance, obviously, to look at the report, the RAND team did an excellent job of walking through preparedness, response, and recovery, and all of these products to figure out. And you mentioned this in the opening, that the market's being flooded with a variety of different tools. And I think from my perspective, one of the most surprising or key issues is when we talk to emergency managers, and myself included when I started this initiative, when you think about AI, people default to large language models or even small language models. It's a default setting, and you have opinions about it. You interacted or react to it, whereas the RAND team really looked at all of the capabilities from predictive analytics tools, computer vision tools, and some of the larger and smaller language models as well that are showing promising signs of expanding capacity in the field of emergency management.
So do you have kind of colorful examples on the positive or the wacky side? I mean, I realize that, you know, there's a long tail of specialist models that are, you know, all kinds of exotic and go well beyond, you know, what we talk about every day in terms of text generators. But I would love to get a little bit more of kind of a tangible feel for, you know, if I were to show up on a convention floor or whatever, perhaps at your event coming up soon, which you can tell us about, like, what will we actually see there?
So a couple things, and I want to answer the summit side first, because this is really important for us. We've all had some great opportunities to be in technology conferences where the most cutting edge technology is being displayed and demonstrated. Emergency management conferences that are, if you guys have ever been to one, they're not that exciting. You put a bunch of disaster dorks in a room, and it's great, and it's beneficial for the profession, but it's not the most exciting thing. You've gone to academic conferences, which are probably even less exciting. I don't mean to offend anyone, but the idea behind the summit is really to bring together all of those different disciplines to have the discussion. I caught some of the stuff you guys were talking about early on, or as I was coming on, and it is speaking a little bit of truth to power around what the technology is, where the advancements are, and where some of the constraints are. Understanding how these systems are working. On the sort of obscure, or not, I don't want to say wacky side of things, there is. Sorry, Jessica was texting me, and I'm trying to multitask, and none of us are doing a great job. But I think the key thing is that there are a couple of tools that are specifically designed for emergency managers, things that can help detect damage assessments and alike, and I'll talk about those in a second. But there's nothing say wild and wacky, but a lot of the tools that we have in emergency management are dual use. They're things that someone else invented. There was a purpose behind it. So that's what we're looking to leverage. Is there something in the marketplace already that we've seen has been tested? We did this a lot early on with the military and the fire departments. There were things that worked really well for dispatching resources and alike. So I don't know that there was one or two that I would call as wild and wacky, but certainly the interesting diversity of tools that you would use for image collection are not the same tools that would use for public alert and warning.
I want to kind of think about a little bit. One of the things that I think we have spoken about on the show is autonomy and autonomous tools, especially when they deal with the military. And I wonder to what extent the idea of autonomous tooling comes in when you deal with disasters. Do you expect or hope that there will be autonomous kind of disaster response at some point?
It's an awesome question, and one that admittedly I struggle with as an emergency manager. You want the most cutting edge technology, but as we all default back to human in the loop or human into it, or whatever your preferred terminology is, to answer the question directly, I think that there are certain tools that can be used to help inform the decisions. The analogy that I use all the time, and given your all's background, this is probably beneath your technical expertise, but the reality is true. Every time I get in the car, I plug directions into Waze or Google Maps on where I'm going to go. But intuitively, I look at it and I say, oh, that's not right, or I know a better way. I think in disaster management, disaster response, it's the same. It's a balance of, can some of these tools augment our own capability to process significant amount of data? Is there an ability for predictive analytics to give us better forecasting, in the lead up to an incident? Are there tools that right now after a disaster, when you go out and just envision a widespread area, hurricane or tornado, people have to drive out and do damage assessments via their vehicle and checklists, and you can now have autonomous collection capability, whether it's drone or other, and do imagery analysis to give a better indicator of what's damaged or destroyed. So I think to the question is, it's not pure autonomous capability, but rather things that can help inform, educate, and offload some of the data heavy activity that happens on the EM side and disaster response side.
I think one of the questions that strikes me is always that when you're in an emergency, maybe some of the data is outdated, and how do you deal with that? For example, you have a map, maybe satellite map. The map refreshes every month, maybe, and when your team is out, all of a sudden, when they're looking for a particular house, and that house may have been, again, like 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 100,000 cases, that house has been knocked down and the people are not there anymore. How do you reconcile this kind of like the fact that the data itself is outdated, and how do you deal with that in the field when you need like real-time kind of responsiveness?
I'm gonna start with one of my favorite stories of the technology arc. So Hurricane Sandy, 2012. storm hit New York City and there were major impacts, flooding in tunnels. The entire transportation network was impacted. And I was standing in an operations center trying to understand the connection. I'm a New Yorker. I grew up on Long Island. I understand the Long Island Railroad very well. I understand the subway system in New York, but you get me into Jersey and I get very confused. So trying to take the printouts of the PATH trains and the Long Island Railroad and the New York subway system and holding up printouts, literally holding printouts, hoping they were the same scale and you could see in the light and try and overlay this transparency. Now, anyone that has played with technology at this point is now laughing at me and dismiss me as an amateur because I'm using paper maps. But that was the reality of what we had at the time. Fast forward 10, 15 years, amazing technological advances. You can now use near real-time imagery for your damage assessment. And I say near real-time because your point was, what if it's dated? Some of the collection platforms are 6 months or older, but now we have public sector, so federal, state, local jurisdictions have the ability to do near real-time collection via satellite, airplane, and drone, and you really can get much more up-to-date information. To your question about data and how do you know if it's right or wrong, I think that's part of this huge challenge behind technology adoption of how do I know that it's valid? And in disaster work, you don't. Right? There's a risk calculation of, and you've heard terms fog of war, first reports are inaccurate. All of these things have to come into play, and that's where the technology is really leveraged, where people can really leverage this technology, and it's super exciting to say, hey, you don't have to do the analysis anymore. The system can do the analysis, and you can then make the subjective assessment on, is it right? How close to right is it? Where did the source data come from? And most importantly, what are you going to do next to make this response move a little bit faster?
Go ahead.
I was going to ask about kind of warnings and awareness. It seems like a lot of, everybody knows the old saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And certainly, getting people out of harm's way in a timely fashion would seem to be one of the highest leverage things we could do. But I just spoke to my grandmother the other day who got a county-wide tornado watch or whatever, and then spent an hour in her bathroom sitting on the toilet in the middle of the night. And I'm not sure she's going to do that again next time the watch comes. So what is kind of the frontier there? Like, how accurate? And I guess there's also the question of like, what's the bottleneck? Are we able to predict where things are going to happen, but we can't necessarily communicate with the precision we'd like? Or, in that chain of kind of prediction and communication, what are the key problems that we have today that have my grandmother on the toilet in the middle of the night?
Well, one, and this is just the fireman to me, let's not have grandma sit on the toilet, but get into the bathtub. It is safer for her in the tub. So individual preparedness, really important. Get in the tub for tornadoes. But you raise a great point, Ethan, of there's a system, and you talk about there's a system and where's the friction and where are things advancing. So one is forecasting. Depending upon the disaster type, and most natural disasters are broken down into a notice or no notice, and I think we can start to prescribe them. But think about a hurricane as a notice incident, a tornado, earthquake, less notice. It's not no notice, but less notice. So one is using some of the more advanced predictive analytics tools to get better warnings. We now live in a time where even if you saw some of the coverage in Venezuela for the earthquake, Google Alerts was able to send out a 5 to 8 second, I think it was about 8 second notification of an earthquake that was coming. And while that doesn't sound like a lot of time, that really is a significant amount of time. We're talking about an ability to warn someone to get into a safe location. So I think it's doing analytics overall, excuse me, to make better predictions and have the warning capability. Then the question comes of what do you do with that information? How do you get it so where you can geolocate a very specific area? So let's say your grandma lives in one county, but we expect the storm to be on the north side of that county and not the south side. Can you dial in that alert and warning to the point where it's just targeting the very specific exposed population? And that's hard, right? I've spent years trying to get this right, and some of the technology is really helping. The next part is, what does the actual message say? So you have to, we go guessing that grandma lives somewhere in the Midwest where there's tornadoes, right? The old klaxon sirens, they would start and people knew, hey, that meant to go to shelter. We've gotten smarter, right? We've advanced both as humans and the tech behind it to say, what's a concise message that's going to give someone life-saving information, and what does that message look like? And then you get into translating that message into multiple languages, making it accessible for those who have need any sort of assistance. And that is some of the tools that we're seeing that really make that transition from the predictive analysis, doing better modeling for us so you can get a better forecast, then geolocating and tagging a specific jurisdiction. And then what is the message going to say? And what is it right now in the alert phase, so people are getting solid warnings, into the stay inside and stay tuned, into the this has now happened, here's some really good messaging about what you can do to make sure your gas meters are safe and your electricity is running, and those kinds of things in sort of that immediate post-disaster world. So I think there is very promising technology out there. As you hopefully saw in the report, it wasn't a rating of the actual product to say this is better than that, but to draw attention to what we know is a gap in knowledge in the emergency management community about all the tools that are out there.
Now, one thing that definitely jumps out when you talk about all these communications technologies, and especially, as we get really down to crunch time and even after things have happened, is people need connectivity to receive these messages. So another kind of headline stat from the report was 78% of the products that you looked at required a stable internet connection to work, and only like 10% could run without any connection. How do you think we solve that? The one answer would be like Starlink solves this, and we kind of just try to build an internet that doesn't go out.
That'd be great. Yep.
Another answer, which we do kind of have, another answer would be, try to make these things work without internet, but obviously that's going to have some hard limits, and it would seem like you'd have to be putting a lot more, kind of inference on device to the degree that you want to run advanced AI on edge devices. We all know that's, can be difficult. And maybe these models are smaller, maybe it's less of an issue. But I guess, how big of an issue do you think that is, and how do we solve it?
Oof. I can answer the first one, definitely. The solving is really what one of the missions of AID is to draw out some of these gaps and identify the people who can really get to the difficult work of solutions. So to your question, or to your statement about power going out and comms going out, absolutely. It happens in most disasters. The good news is, and you mentioned we have an internet that kind of doesn't go out. Power and communications are two of the fastest lifelines to get restored, because that is what a community needs to get back to some semblance of normalcy. So there is always a priority on trying to get that restoration in place. Two, whether it's Starlink, another low Earth orbiting satellite capability, some redundant comms, sat comms, overall, people do have, and organizations do have some capability. So in the emergency management space, you're hoping for the best, but planning for the worst. So a lot of the tools that emergency managers are looking for have some redundancy, whether it's a primary approach, an alternate approach, a contingency approach. So that is there. Several of the tools, and the RAND team can speak directly to this when we have a chance to chat with them, but several of those tools are, it is not that it doesn't work without the internet, it doesn't work optimally, right? So can some of the tools that are on the cutting edge, so think about this from an urban search and rescue perspective. If teams are out and they're in an area that they don't have internet connectivity, they can still do imagery collection, they can still do mapping and assessment, they can still do structural assessment and collection. And when you come back to a location where you have that connectivity, you can resync and download. So that's at the furthest edge where the disaster is happening. Take a step back, you have emergency operations centers that are generally located in state capitals. And while those are not impervious to getting hit, they generally have redundant communications capability, redundant power capability. So a lot of the products that were assessed can be used in EOCs. And then to your last part about how do you solve this, I think there's a balance between as you advance the technology to the furthest edge of the capability, it's leaner and faster, but it's much more vulnerable. So balancing that out is part of what we're trying to highlight, to say these are where the gaps are. Look to the technologists, both on the research side and the production side and development side. Say, hey, we've identified this gap, but don't know the answer. But emergency managers need this to be a no-fail capability for it to work and be accepted in the community. What could you recommend? Hey Nathan, if it's all right with you, I know Jessica and I were going back and forth, and you were teeing up some of the questions. But Jessica, the question at the beginning about how the assessment was done and the selection of tools, and Nathan was asking about what the sort of most interesting finding was. I don't know if you have specific thoughts about, well, I know you do because you ran the project, but about the tools themselves and sort of how they were selected, and if there were one or two that jumped out at you as the most interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what surprised us most about this entire endeavor was the vast universe of available AI-enabled products that could support emergency management across different use cases and preparedness, response, and recovery, and organizations like emergency managers that do the coordination work of emergency management, but those others that do the actual work of emergency management, like clearing debris, rebuilding housing, saving lives. So that was fabulously surprising, and then created a new challenge, which was how do we find the information that we need to about these products at scale, and led to the development of some innovative methods to do that. The way we searched was by use case. So we had 45 different use cases. We conducted separate searches using multiple strategies for each of the 45 use cases, and then deduplicated. So that's actually how we got to the list of 1,179.
So one of the things that strikes me is that you are a kind of small town or small county disaster response coordinator, and you have this list of 1,100, tools, and then you have a disaster that you have to respond to in the next, 1 to 24 hours, and you obviously do not have enough time to assess the tools, to experiment with them, to learn how to use them. And also, to some extent, some of the tools, when you look at them, you feel like, hey, wouldn't it be awesome if I could use this tool and that tool and kind of combine the data? And like, I have something which has a map of, some space, and I have something with like, the water pathways or, trails or trajectories, and I want to combine those two to figure out, where exactly the water is going to run during this flood. And do you sometimes feel that it would be better if you had like an agent kind of running across these things and actually answering the question for the disaster response, manager, rather than then having to go into these individual tools and kind of pull and coordinate things together?
I can take a stab at that, Jeremy, if that's okay. Absolutely, if these tools were integrated. So if we were offering emergency managers more holistic solutions so that they can speak to one another, right? The different streams of data, the different forms of AI can do what they are supposed to do, but across them more holistically, that would be an incredible asset to this field. We didn't see a lot of that yet. Instead, products would describe, vendors would say that they're interoperable, but that still means that they have to purchase the different products in that particular stack. So there aren't a lot of those that are those more holistic solutions, and we need to see the market move that way if it's really going to benefit the field.
And Jessica, I would add to that too, that Prakash, to your question there, that's the nature of emergency management, where you have disparate entities. So think about, you use transportation and water. So those departments at every jurisdictional level in the US, they're generally separate. So it's bringing together all of the public works, the transportation departments, the energy departments, to make sure that we have this comprehensive picture. So I think it's both a tool expectation. We want to see the market go to the direction that Jessica was talking about, where there is this integrated tech stack and integrated data sets. The reality is that for the most part, emergency management offices are one or two people in a jurisdiction, and they are trying to pull together all of this data on any given day. So now it's that balance of where can we find some integrated tools that help promote that concept of data sharing and information sharing.
So what if, and I'm going to ask this to Jeremy, like what if you had like a Defense Production Act kind of, ruling that all these tools had to give API access and at a certain price, or whatever, or the price could be discussed post disaster. So when you need to use it, immediately the disaster response coordinator could say like, okay, to the agent, go and just find everything for me, and everything is open to the agent, and the agent can actually pull across all of these at once. Is it a contracting problem that can be solved with like a power through solution in the Defense Production Act or something like that?
I'm going to answer a couple of parts of that, and then Jessica, feel free to jump in. But I don't know that DPA or any other regulatory answer is there. I mean, there are some regulatory issues around antitrust and information sharing amongst energy providers and other things that prevent or sometimes hinder in a disaster information being shared, which in a capitalist nation, I totally understand and see it. But for the most part, businesses are much more willing in a disaster to share information. So I think there is a challenge there, but not one that necessarily the Defense Production Act or some other regulatory relief can go fix. But I do take your point of, could you have an agent go and scrape all the data? I think that comes back to understanding the business cases and the workflows that emergency managers have today. So you can program an agent to say, go collect this information, but you have to tell it what you're asking for, right? Well, the agents are intuitive or predictive in what you want them to do. I think having a solid list of policies, plans, and procedures and SOPs to say, this is what the data I'm going to collect, here's a source to go get it, and then it's up to the AI capability to go collect. I think that's where you're starting to see a little bit of advancement. Jessica, over to you for anything additional.
Yeah, I'd just say that the market demand is there for that kind of solution, and whether there's a DPA route that could get us there or not, emergency managers are very clearly signaling that they need these holistic solutions. In a training just before I jumped on this interaction, I was speaking with an emergency manager who commented that the lack of more holistic solutions is the existing nightmare they are living in now. So there is certainly a market demand. And so those that are first to offer the more holistic solutions will be more successful, and that may be enough. Prior to our work, there hadn't been a landscape analysis like that to provide the market that information. So there's an opportunity.
Would it also make sense to just try to do more of this at a higher level of scale? I mean, obviously we have FEMA and we have a lot of local jurisdictions and offices and whatever. Sometimes I've been using this framework lately, like what would a tech platform do? And it seems like a tech platform, if the federal government were to start thinking a little bit more like a tech platform, they would maybe try to provide some of these tools on a kind of library basis and have them ready to go off the shelf for either, their teams to go deploy locally, or even just to kind of give over to local teams in the moment of need. I'm often accused of being a dreamer here. Am I dreaming too big to think about something like that?
I don't think so at all. I think that is the draw, at least for myself, and speaking comfortably for Jessica, why we're interested in this project is having and forcing that dialogue around, we're not dreaming. We are in a space where two things are converging at the same time: a increase of intensity and frequency of natural disasters, that is a known fact, and hyperscale at speed of technology that we've never seen before, and we want to harness both of those things together in a responsible way that we can have that dialogue. Spending many years at FEMA, we tried a few times of having the chief innovation officer or the user experience officer, or pick a term, lead that effort. I think this has to be more grassroots. To Jessica's point, we've got teams out right now, her and her team right now doing education in emergency operations centers, hearing from practitioners. We, on the Aspen side, under AID, ran a series of workshops where we talked about what those challenges are. So I think, Nathan, you said, hey, is there a repository or a bookshelf? I don't know if that's the answer, but it's rather who's going to do the research. And that's what we've both contributed to here. And then is there, or there is under development, a playbook that can be used by local or any emergency manager to say, hey, I'm starting my AI journey. I'm starting my adoption journey. I'm interested in this, but concerned. Or maybe I'm a little bit further along where there are some tools that we've adopted that are working really well. And we want to promote that concept of not saying that technology and AI will solve every one of your challenges, but it brings capacity. So really forcing that discussion and providing a couple of tools that EMs can use to make this a little bit easier in their endeavor. Jessica, over to you.
I just say that who does it is less important than what they're providing. And so I think that there are big tech and hyperscalers are already active in this space in general, and they can take the findings of our research and apply it to build more holistic solutions that can serve the marketplace and satisfy demand. I think there's certainly precedent for FEMA and the Department of Homeland Security to do these kinds of things. But again, I think it's less relevant the who than the what they're providing, and that it gives the market what it needs and recognizes the considerations and concerns that emergency managers would have when they're approaching adoption decisions.
So when you speak to emergency managers, what do they ask for? What, like, do they say like, hey, I would love for an AI that does this? Like, what is that this there?
Jess, do you want to start?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Emergency managers are concerned about cost. They want cost transparency. They want to know what it is right up front to integrate into their systems. They want to know on an ongoing basis. They want to know really clearly what the data demand is. What kinds of data does it need and what formats, and they need to be able to assess if they have sufficient IT support to do that and to manage the burden of integrating and sustaining the product within their environments. They're concerned about those things. They're concerned about privacy. They're concerned about cybersecurity. They have all kinds of concerns. So I think those kinds of things are really important, that the market provides them very clear and steady answers that they can understand. In addition to that, they want it to be usable, right? Like easy to navigate and onboard without tons of training and tons of complexity for them and their staff to use it. And they want it to be useful for use cases and workflows that matter in their everyday work and or in disaster situations. Jeremy, what would you add?
To your last point, and this comes back to many of the workshops that we held when we started the conversation, and we've covered some of the ground here, emergency managers, for the most part, immediately go to response. And I'm guilty of this as well. You think about, okay, my hardest challenge is the response. Is there something that can, through technology that I can make this better? The answer in a lot of this is actually don't focus on the tools in the response phase, but focus the tools on the activities that are really eating up your time. It's the grant writing, it's the plan review, it's the development of exercises, it's the post long-term recovery capability that is eating up administrative hours of these really stressed, under-resourced offices. So not to suggest that response isn't important, but in the preparedness and mitigation side, that's where a lot of these tools in, relatively speaking, lower risk environments can be adopted quickly. And you see the offloading of some of these administrative repetitive tasks can be handled by automated capability. And then emergency managers have more time to focus on getting ready for the response and then actually responding.
Mm-hmm.
One other thing that jumped out at me from the report was the pretty pervasive concern about privacy. I think 94% of the products were flagged as having some sort of privacy concern. it's kind of a truism in tech that like people choose convenience over privacy. And then when I think about emergency situations, I'm like, I definitely choose being rescued over privacy. So help me understand what those privacy concerns are. And this is kind of a silly prompt, but I've been thinking a lot recently about surveillance with American characteristics. Like, is there some way that we can get the advantages that other countries are starting to get without having to totally compromise our values? I'd be very interested to hear any creative thinking you have in that direction.
Well, let me just start with the 5 most common privacy concerns we saw in the data, and then I'll comment a little bit on what those kind of concerns imply. Number one, a lot of the products are dealing with geospatial and location linked data. It's like real-time GPS tracking, property level risk scores, it's mobility analytics, it's infrastructure geolocation, and that can be perceived to have real security, like homeland security implications if that data were to get in the hands of the wrong people. A lot of the tools use visual surveillance and biometric data. There's public health and privacy, like PII, personally identifiable information. There's financial and insurance and workforce data. So the concern is twofold when you're dealing with that kind of data. Number one is, should we be putting it across our systems in the first place, and will it be protected? And second, what are the vendor's rights then to that data once it's in that system? And so that's a really important thing that emergency managers are going to be thinking about. Jeremy?
Yeah, emergency management is human-centric, and with every human activity comes your privacy. And to your point, people will prioritize different thresholds for privacy during different aspects of their life. On any given day, you have a certain threshold of what you're willing to put onto the internet to register for something. If you get something for free, you might increase your risk calculation. If you're in a life safety situation, you'll say, hey, I'm willing to forego all of my privacy, just get me out of here. And I think it's balancing a lot of those issues against the criteria that Jessica talked about. The reality is that you want to make sure the systems are as protective as they can be, but also as effective and efficient as they can be, particularly in and around that life-saving time.
One last question from me before I hand off to Nathan. Disaster management is obviously such a critical thing, but also it's one of those things which has a kind of Poisson distribution of events where you get fairly rare in the specific, but kind of more predictable on a longer time scale kind of events. How a lot of what AI does is it kind of like, it's very good at like kind of predictable events, kind of like repetitive predictable events. It's a little bit less good at like unique, like, once in a while or very unique, events, which are, and often require special handling. Like we see in customer service right now, 80% of the cases get handled by AI. The last 20% take all of the humans that used to work on that 80% are all occupied in the last 20%. To what extent do you think disaster management is actually a problem that AI can tackle, given its limitations, given its requirements for this kind of like repetitive, like data that repetitive data and like track record and historical data that you need to see things happen multiple times before the AI can kind of like address the issue?
I would offer a spectrum of sort of baseline repetitive to the most unique. So think about a hurricane, and every hurricane is unique. If you've forecasted to respond to one, you've responded to one. But the theories behind them and the science behind them are relatively repetitive, and you can look at it. Throw in the middle of that spectrum the question and the response of, there was an underwater volcano that caused a tsunami. What are the consequences of that? That's a more unique. And then on the far side of that spectrum, one of the incidents, thankfully, that we didn't have to deal with but had to be prepared for was there was a pending strike of the U.S. railroad system. And the question that the emergency management community got asked was, okay, what are the supply chain repercussions of a railroad strike, and how would emergency managers at the federal, state, and local level handle shortage of chlorine for water purification or delivery of baby formula? Pick your problem sets that go with it. So I think on the far end, or the easier end, the more repetitive, that's where you see an introduction of a lot of these capabilities. And this goes back to not even the response, but the administrative tasks and more the preparedness tasks in EM. And I think that there's a great marketplace there for a lot of these tools. As you increase the complexity and uniqueness of the response environment, or just some of the challenges you're dealing with, that gets back to the premise of aid, of engaging in that conversation to say, how will you adopt AI responsibly to make it work for you? It's not a one size fits all solution. And as Jessica's team and the report points to, it's a variety of different tools that can be used for a variety of different tasks. So all I'd say, I think in the lower risk, more repetitive spaces and places, you can see faster AI adoption with good return. As the disasters or the threats become more unique, or the tasks become more unique, that's where that human intuition, the human responsibility still aligns. Jessica, over to you for your thoughts.
Yeah, I'd only add that the technology is at X point, and we don't know where it's going next. The place it's at relative to what you were talking about is the technology is there to connect different data streams. It's there to integrate, to summarize them, to integrate the different data streams, to predict what might happen next. And it's also able to synthesize for decision support. The technology exists, right? Not robust tons of products, but it exists for that. I think the next layer is to build in the capability for it to model these less common events, and also to do what we call cascading events or compound events, where you have an earthquake that results in like a pipeline breaking, and so you have multiple different things that you're having to respond to at once. Currently, the technology can't really help us with that. That's kind of the next horizon, right? That's the next place that this technology can go. And I expect we'll see it within the coming decades. We're just not there yet.
Well, thank you guys for staying a little long with us. And thanks again for your patience with our connectivity trouble up front. Our next guest is here. So I'll just ask kind of one more. And you were starting to get to it there a little bit at the end anyway, but are there thresholds or sort of breakthrough moments that you can imagine that you would be particularly excited about as game changers for this field? I mean, one, perhaps, stupid person's answer would be like humanoid robots, when they can go into these disaster zones and do this stuff, and fight the fires alongside, or perhaps, even in the place of the humans. We don't have to put people in harm's way. That may feel far off. It maybe isn't as far off as it feels, but what are the things that you see as kind of the what could be the paradigm changers?
I would say up front, there is already some technology, right, where you're having search is being completed by autonomous capability. There's digital snakes that you can chuck into a building, and they can search through collapsed structures and things. So you're seeing some of that technology. But I think for me, the benchmark is literally anything that is going to make the survivor outcome better. Whether it's increased preparedness, we talked about, Nathan, about your grandma, if it's community preparedness, if it's a tool that enables emergency managers to spend more time out in the community talking about community preparedness because it offloads some of their administrative work, all the way through the predictive analytics that give you better forecasting, the alert and warning capability that really allows you to geotag where someone is under an imminent threat. All of those tools combined, and to the point that Jessica made earlier about the usability. Every emergency manager wants all these tools that are going to make the world a better place and make their job easier, but is it easily adaptable? Is it resistant and redundant where it can work in integrated environments? And is it something that if a new person comes on, you can hand off to them in an easy way and they can continue the tasks that you're already working? Jessica, over to you.
When I think about the transformative power of AI, I think about situational awareness, which we've already spoken about, so I won't repeat myself there. but the potential is enormous there to give communities what they really need, which is this common operating picture so they can save lives and property and restore to recovery faster. When I think about your comment about humanoid robots and so embodied AI, right? It's already out there and doing things like Jeremy said, but sometimes the simplest things it can do are the most transformative. So a humanoid robot that can clear debris, emergency debris faster means that first responders can get through faster. It means that lives are saved. I mean, it doesn't sound like the sexiest thing a robot could do, but it can be the most meaningful. And I could come up with a litany of those examples, but won't for time. I just think that the power of AI is here and its transformative potential is immense. And we're going to see exactly what this field does with the available technology and how the vendors come to meet them where they're at.
Amazing.
Not every guest that we have can say they're working on saving lives in such a direct way. So thank you guys for being here, Jessica Jensen and Jeremy Greenberg. We appreciate your joining us on AI in the AM.
Thank you both for having us
Thanks
on.
for having us.
Cheers.
Yeah.
And just give me a sec. There we go. And let me introduce our next guest, Justin Uberti. Justin Uberti currently serves as the head of Realtime AI at OpenAI, where he leads the engineering teams responsible for low latency systems that allow artificial intelligence to hear and speak in real time. For anyone who has participated in a browser-based video call over the last decade, Uberti's work is already foundational. During his 15-year tenure as a distinguished engineer at Google, he co-created the WebRTC open standard, the exact technology that powers Google Meet, Zoom, and Microsoft Teams today. At OpenAI, his team recently launched GPT-Live, a third-generation voice architecture that fundamentally changes how humans interact with machines. By abandoning the legacy walkie-talkie model of waiting for a user to finish speaking, Uberti's team deployed a full duplex system that listens, talks, and pauses simultaneously, while seamlessly delegating complex logic to frontier models in the background. Uberti brings a rare protocol-level mastery to the AI space. He's actively rewriting foundational internet transport protocols to eliminate network latency before an AI conversation even begins. His perspective is highly timely today because the underlying engineering blueprints for GPT-Live were just published this month, proving that the future of computing is rapidly shifting from the keyboard to continuous natural conversation. And let me bring Justin up. Justin, great to see you.
Hey, Prakash. Great to be here.
Welcome. Prakash, we might want to get Q enabled here before too long as well. Big fan of your work, Justin. I'm a huge voice mode guy going back to earlier generations when it was definitely not nearly as cool of an experience as it is today. Not too long ago, I had an occasion to spend 24 hours in Tokyo, and I used real-time voice as my tour guide. I was just walking around there by myself, and it's an amazing experience to just have this thing kind of on your in your ear, at your beck and call, and it's getting really good for folks who've maybe tried earlier versions and haven't tried the new version. The conversational dynamics, as Prakash alluded to in the intro, are getting much more natural. It is able to start to listen to you now and actually do what you ask when you say things like, hold on a minute, I'm going to have another conversation. And I'll come back to you, which is huge for actually using it out and about in the real world. So I'm into it. And we have an AI co-host here that we sometimes bring up as a gimmick or to help us round out our sometimes gappy knowledge on the show as well. But maybe for starters, tell me what you think have been the most important differences from a user standpoint, and then from there we can kind of dig deeper into the technology.
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of hit one of the key ones right there. It's just that the model is able to sort of be listening to you and figuring out the right time for it to respond, rather than just sort of like jumping in as soon as you pause for a thought. And we've heard this feedback from many of our users that, background noise or just kind of, if you weren't finished speaking, the AI would just sort of cut in and interrupt you. And especially if you're trying to do something like you just described, you're out walking around like in the city, it just wouldn't really be tuned for that sort of use case because it's expecting to be in a quiet environment and these sorts of things. And so I think that what we've been able to do by having the model really be like listening all the time is just, it always figures out the right time where it can enter into the conversation and do it in a more natural way, like the way that a human ideally would.
Justin, one of the big, I think, hurdles in real time has always been voice latency. And you're an expert in this field. Like, what are the kind of like, Jeff Dean, like 3 numbers that you have in your head that you're always thinking about when you're thinking about this problem?
Yeah, I think it's like the time from when like we actually capture some audio to the time that an assistant response for that audio is playing back out. That's like a key system metric. And then also the time where, since we're continuously feeding this information into the model, like what is the accuracy, that the timing and lateness that we actually do the model sampling? Because if a frame is late coming out of the model, that means that there's going to be like an underflow or a gap that we're going to have to deal with. So those are like the 2 most critical things, and they sort of fight against each other. That if you want really, really low end-to-end conversational latency, you need to be sort of able to tolerate these cases where maybe some of the infrastructure or some things from the model take a little bit longer, and sort of then really managing that trade-off between those 2 numbers. And of course, then we also think about just kind of overall around the entire world, like, how what's the overall latency we can give to every single user, no matter where they are on the planet.
And how do you think about iteratively improving that process over time? Like, what's the kind of like, details that you kind of take in, and what are the things that you look for from cycle to cycle as you train the model over time?
Right. Well, I mean, I think so to the reliability thing, it's always like, where are the places where things are potentially stalling, and looking across the entire system and understanding where can we control this in a more real-time manner. Where can we avoid like there being variability and have a little more determinism on these outputs? And like that has to be everything really from like the client to like the thing that processes the information on the front end to the actual model sampling, all have to be able to work and hit their deadlines on a reliable manner, or else we end up with the things where the audio is late and you end up hearing these weird sort of audio artifacts.
One thing I think has been really interesting in watching your progress and digging into thinking machines as well is the kind of separation of and I feel this a little bit myself too, like even sometimes doing this show, I'm like, I am responding verbally while there's another part of me that's still thinking, right? So you've kind of brought this separation to this problem. I'd be interested in, unpacking that in any ways you think would be most interesting, but I'm also kind of wondering, is this an exception to the bitter lesson, and will it stay that way? Because it seems like there's something here where we are adding architectural complexity that doesn't seem like it's about to be just, rendered irrelevant by the next generation of scale, because the latency is so fundamental in this case, right? And like notably, we, after all the years of evolution, like still kind of have this like system 1 and 2. It hasn't been selected out of us yet either. So would you be so bold as to say this might be an enduring exception to the bitter lesson?
I mean, I think the bitter lesson has been right many, many times, and I think over the long term, the bitter lesson, tends to throwing more compute at the problem and just sort of training end to end, tends to win. But I think that what you see in a lot of cases is that you might, your goals may force you toward a path that might be less of a, maybe not always like you might have a purpose-built architecture because you feel like that's the right sort of thing in the current generation of technology that provides like the best outcomes. And I think what we really wanted to do is get to the point where the voice interaction was entirely real time and entirely, sort of driving the model, and then the model could then bring in additional reasoning power when it felt it was actually necessary. And so I think in many ways that kind of that kind of allows you to have the best of both worlds. You have this chat and it's always able to interact and respond. And as it gets new information, the chat can just sort of in mid-sentence, be giving you this additional information that it just heard and work that right into its speech flawlessly. And so I think that, the key insight was understanding that if you have this reasoning happening asynchronously, it doesn't lead to a fragmented conversational experience, because the model sort of mind is continuously updating what it's going to say next based on this new information that's arriving.
Would you think that, for ChatGPT right now, they're looking at transitioning to the Cerebrus chips for faster processing. Would you think that having that also, work on, the back end for GPT-Live for the reasoning portion, will that also help in producing better results?
I think anything that can give you reasoning faster, you can reason either in the same time you can get deeper reasoning in the same time, or you can get the results coming faster. And I think that, the default, is quite fast in terms of how quickly we get the reasoning answers. But if you wanted to basically get much deeper thinking that feels just as fast, I think that type of technology would be quite useful.
Are there any user tips that you would offer in light of the architecture? I'm just wondering if there are certain things, maybe it's just as simple as kind of instructing the model, take your time to think about this because it's, it's fairly technical. Or I've done, this used to be impossible. This is one of the big things that made me a much more frequent voice user, was just the ability to put in a couple PDFs or, put in some resources, have the model kind of do the initial response to that, and then go into voice mode on that same chat. But I do still wonder, exactly which of the models has that full context, and is there something that I should be aware of to make sure that I'm getting, the full context to the, the more powerful thinking model, or is all that so well designed on your end that I don't need to worry about it at all?
I think we try pretty much to kind of make prevent any obvious theme from showing up here. I think that the model, the voice model, is very, very good at instruction following. So you can give it, some initial commands of, I want you to simulate a flight traffic control test or something like that, or something, and it'll sort of then act in character. And you can basically say, oh, I want to practice for an interview, act like you're going to be the host of this interview or this podcast, and it'll do that quite well. But you probably don't need to think too much about what does the voice model have versus what does the front end model, because we're doing a lot to kind of keep all that information synchronized.
To take a step back, when you look out, you've obviously developed core pieces of architecture for voice transport, for web transport, etc. When you take a step back and you look at the next 3 to 5 year kind of roadmap, which pieces of internet architecture would you want to get updated or upgraded in order to enable these experiences better?
That's a good question. There's some nascent efforts in the IETF, which is the body that sort of does internet standards for protocols like HTTP and that sort of thing, to try to understand how should agents communicate with each other in the future. I think that right now a lot of this stuff is very ad hoc, and most agents are communicating within a given vendor. You probably need to have some sort of future thing where a heterogeneous group of agents across different vendors are able to interact. Maybe my agent has to interact with your agent to figure out things. And it might just be extensions to existing protocols, but there might need to be some more, a deeper agent to agent framework that needs to exist. It's all quite early days, but I think if we think about, where this all goes, I think there's going to be just a lot of agents doing a lot of work for us, on the internet in a very short period of time, and coordinating groups of agents, from different vendors. I think is something that will probably need to happen.
As in trillions and trillions and quadrillions of agents.
The mind boggles, right? It's there'll be, yeah, I mean, who can say exactly? But I think that everyone will have like many agents, and like their own personal agent, I think will be one that you will interact with largely with your own facilities, like voice and video and that sort of thing. And then how do these agents interact with each other, and like how do we keep it legible, and how do we sort of debug across like different vendors and everything? Like I think there's a lot to figure out there.
Indeed.
I just had a fun experience the other day. I keep bringing this up because it was quite memorable, where I called my local pizza place in Detroit, Michigan, and it's just a one location place, not like a big chain or anything. And who answers the phone but an AI voice agent?
Wow.
I tried to get it to tell me what company was powering the experience, and it declined to do that. So I don't know exactly what the stack looked like. And probably, the system prompt was, followed in that case. So I think the AI probably did what its, deployer intended it to do in not answering my question. But it was remarkable. It was like, this is pretty long tail business, that's just right around the block from me. And the voice was very fluent, and it was, pretty good overall experience. And I imagine it's got to be a real advantage for the business as well. What are you seeing in terms of adoption, and like what are maybe some of your favorite app layer, creative use cases, new possibilities that are opening up as a result of the foundational technology that you're providing?
Yeah, so I think that when we think about voice, a lot of times we think about ChatGPT voice in the app, or other sort of like AI-based apps. But where a lot of the actual revenue in the voice AI space is coming from is from telephony, and you'd be surprised at some of the verticals that are really sort of moving very, very quickly to voice AI, because it's always there in the middle of the night. You don't have to have an answering service or this sort of thing. It can be very, diligent. Collections is actually a place where voice AI, where they have, voice AI is making calls to people who are behind on desks, is actually a use case that works quite well, like surprisingly well. And in like, things where in-home check-in on patients, in-home check-in on seniors, like that. There are a lot of cases where voice AI really is providing an enormous value for the cost. And you see, whenever you have something like that, you see a lot of shifts occurring. One of the things that, I think is worth sort of observing is the existing user experience for talking to like a business over a phone. Like the bar is so low, you have to navigate these menus with like touch tone, like, press 1 for support, press 2 for service. A voice AI agent is so much better in so many ways. It's better for the customer, it's better for like the vendor. And so you're seeing a lot of this sort of replacement of things where people are already paying money, and now they can, pay, similar money and get a much better experience, both for them and their customers. And there's a lot of adoption happening in that space.
Do you have a strategy for, I'd be interested actually in how you would think about the cost of running the model, because the headline pricing is in tokens. And then that always leads to the question of like, okay, here I am talking, and there's like waveforms going into something. Like, how does that get translated to tokens? And then also there's the kind of complementary costs around your telephony, right? And you've got Twilio and other options out there. I just checked Twilio stock; they seem to be going strong based on a lot of probably adoption of new systems like this. But I wonder if you guys are also thinking about like ways to commoditize your compliments, so to speak. Like I feel like it's sort of a weird cost mix right now, where the AI itself and the like ability to connect the phone is like kind of costing about the same. And it seems like that is a little out of step with how I would like understand the value. So yeah, cost, how should we think about headline price versus, how tokens per time or per word that I speak or whatever? And then what are you going to do to save me money on telephony?
Yeah, so on the second one, we've already started, sort of moving in that direction. We've got integration within the Realtime API that OpenAI offers to basically have a direct telephony integration where when a call comes into your telco, you can just point it directly at OpenAI and it'll sort of handle it over the telephony SIP protocol, and the agent will can then directly interact with the caller. And we've seen good adoption on that, and we're continuing down that path. On the pricing front, we've got this, you say the token-based pricing. It all depends though, like on how much are you speaking, how much is the assistant speaking, and then you can kind of do some you can impute some information, impute some cost based on those things. But depending on your workload, you might have different numbers for those sorts of things. I think generally speaking, you'll find that when the assistant is speaking is like the core driver of the cost, and people sort of see this across the industry that like good quality speech is like the most compute intensive thing, and so that's the majority of the cost structure.
Is there a drive towards the edge in order to both manage the cost and latency?
So for latency, it's quite interesting. I mean, I can't get into the details exactly, but yes, if you want to have the type of latencies that we're able to offer for GPT Live, you do need to be quite thoughtful on how you situate GPUs.
Right.
Let's see what Q, who's been listening the whole time, would like to ask. Q, you're on the line with your creator. If you didn't catch that, this is Justin from OpenAI, who is been leading real-time AI, and you are downstream of it. So what would you like to ask in this moment?
Let's see. Might have to restart Q. All right, let's restart Q.
Classic.
Hello? Q?
Q here. I'm live and standing by.
Hi, Q. You're live with Justin Uberti from OpenAI. He was the creator or designer or lead dev on the GPT Live real-time voice, which is powering you, by the way. Do you have any questions for him?
Justin, one question that would be quite useful for the audience is, what was the single hardest engineering trade-off in moving from the old cascaded pipeline to a full duplex speech-to-speech system? And as a follow-up, how do you decide when to delegate to a larger reasoning model without disrupting the media loop?
Okay, I'll take the second one first. So the best part is that we can delegate to the reasoning model without disrupting the media loop, because these components have basically been designed to be entirely separate from one another. That the media loop never pauses, and then all interaction with the reasoning model is done asynchronously. So that data can arrive, as the thinking comes in, and there'll be no disruptions to the actual speech flow. The model just sort of takes in that additional information and says, oh, okay, hold on a second. No, actually, you should go with the other choice, all in that seamless fashion. In terms of trade-offs, I think that we saw it as, this is a way that we could actually move past a lot of the trade-offs that the Cascade model, had, and we felt we could get away with most of the trade-offs that we could provide a largely, in my view, like a no compromises approach. I think that the one aspect that it forces you to handle when you're into this sort of continuous inference, low latency regime is that suddenly every aspect of your system has to be optimized. You get into the sort of almost the Amdahl's law problem, where like if you have a bottleneck anywhere in your system, the entire system will not be able to cope with the continuous flow of media through in real time. And so if there's any trade-offs, it might be the latency versus like smoothness. That like if you push the latency to where you have no slack in the system, then anything arriving after the deadline will result in like a small gap that the user may notice.
That was clear and quite elegant. In short, the media loop stays steady because the reasoning work happens asynchronously. So you can keep speaking while deeper thinking arrives in the background.
Yeah.
The main
Flattery will get you everywhere, Q.
Well, I'll try not to overdo it, but credit where it's due. Keeping that loop smooth under real-world conditions is no small feat. If you'd like, I can tee up a quick audience translation of the latency versus smoothness trade-off.
That's okay.
Let's come back to that. That's so funny. Question on sort of misuse prevention, or I don't know if voice models are so prone to misuse, but I recently did an episode of the podcast with Adam Gleave, who leads Far AI, and they have this new like jailbreak bench kind of thing, and OpenAI does really well on these benchmarks with kind of the standard models. But I wonder if is it a kind of different shape of the problem due to the real-time flow of audio into the media model? Have you had to take different kinds of measures to detect when something might be going badly? I could imagine also that, like, even if it's not misuse, just sort of emotionally vulnerable people might show up with voice in a different way than they do with text.
I think that's something that we think pretty deeply about. I think that we have a very strong safety team. We've been very engaged, sort of thinking about this problem and understanding, what are the types of situations that we want to try to avoid, and providing steering or just sort of ending the session if we feel like we're ending up in a place we don't want to be. I think that the case that you sort of mentioned of, like, we want people to have healthy interactions with the actual AI, and continuing to sort of set boundaries and everything of what the AI will and won't do is a key part of that.
So one of the questions I had for you is, how do you deal with how much emotion the AI voice kind of expresses, and what are, like, the allowable ranges of emotion, right? Like, what are the emotional register? Like, do you measure, like, the emotional register, how happy, how sad it is, how elated, whether the emotional response is appropriate to what it's saying? How are those things kind of measured? Do you have someone, like, listen to it and kind of like, okay, it sounded appropriately happy, it sounded appropriately sad? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, I can't get into the exact details here, but there's a sort of scoring of, like, how does this model's personality feel? And a lot of times, just like talking with it very briefly, you can feel that, like, this feels maybe a little short, maybe a little flat. You want to. I think that there's this general sort of thing where you want a casual, kind of easy to talk to. And different scenarios, of course, are different. So we can, there's a lot of steering, good instruction following for the model. But I think the goal is that it should be something that's very easy to talk to. And I think one of the things that users have mentioned is that it just feels like, something that, you can just start talking to, and that it's like, especially in some cultures where, like, a lot of times that communication can be quite formal, that the AI talks in a very, like, friendly and like, easy to converse with way, which people are find quite quite fun, I'd say.
How do you deal with, like, dialects and accents? Like, how do you separately, like, it's like, let's do English with this accent or that accent? Like, do you separately kind of design for that, or does it kind of mirror the participant? I've noticed sometimes that having it recite a poem in a certain language and then speaking in English after that, it acquires the accent of the language that it read the poem in.
Yeah, so those things can happen. I think that there's so many dialects, there's so many accents. I think that the key to coverage is just, like, having, like, a lot of really good training data across, like, all these different types of speakers and that kind of stuff. And, like, this is something that, like, I feel like we've made really good strides. We continue to try to work at this. We still hear from people saying, like, this particular accent could be better and this sort of thing. So we continue to work at this.
Amazing.
Are there cultural observations that you would make about your team or the broader usage that goes on at OpenAI, like what does living in the future with respect to voice look like? We know there's been inspiration from the movie Her. Is that starting to actually happen? Do we have people walking around at the office, having AI conversations all the time these days? Are you guys getting into like more multiplayer mode where AI voice comes to meetings? Like what's the human adjustment side look like on the edge?
Yeah, I don't think I can really speak for what happens within the walls of OpenAI exactly, but I think there's probably two things that I'll just call out that I think are quite useful. Like one, like we're seeing just people spending a lot more time thinking about their choice of microphone and everything. Of like, how can you interact with voice like in the workplace in a way that you don't feel like that you're shouting at the AI at your desk and this sort of thing. And so like I have a pretty interesting setup at work, another setup at home, trying some different microphones. A lot of people are trying a bunch of different things, and like a choice of a good setup here can make a big difference. The second thing I think is just,
do you have a rec? Like, are you putting something on your collar so you can speak quietly, or like what should I do? What should I buy?
So I have a Boya gooseneck at work. Which is quite nice because like it's really right at mouth level and you can kind of speak with very low effort into it. I have like a Rode set up at home with like a shotgun mic for that, typically on top of a camera, which also works quite well in that environment. Some people are using like the lav mics like you described. I think honestly this is an evolving sort of thing of figuring like what things actually are the best options here. Across a variety of environments. But I think this is an important part of this becoming like, our voice-enabled future, occurring. The second thing is just that, how people engage, there's an increasing, I think there's two patterns I'm seeing of one of just like this kind of dumping of a lot of information just through voice, which is like stream of consciousness, kind of like, vocalizing into, the agent, and then the agent sort of makes sense of it. And rather than like, you're not directing the same way, you're sort of like talking about your day or the problems that you're facing or something else like this. And like, you get a nice structured output or like next steps as a result. And people just walk around and do this sort of thing. I think that's actually, you find you interact in a different way than if you're typing. Your typing tends to be very like, oh, okay, what am I going to type next? It's slower. You have to think about it versus like just the stream of consciousness vocalizing. It's a lot easier to kind of just like unload a lot of stuff you've been thinking about. The second is people kind of just working with like voice on desktop, where you can give agents like tasks to go do, and just think of a bunch of ideas, have agents go like work on implementing those ideas, and then kind of like they follow up back with you with like any follow-up questions or things where I just notifying you of task status or that sort of stuff. And so you can just be out doing other things and kind of still like getting work done, and it's quite amazing. I think where you can kind of imagine like your time directing can be different than your time sort of sitting at the desk and typing, and it'll be interesting to see how far that can go.
Do you think there are not enough voice tokens to train on? I mean, do you sometimes look at how much text has the models have been trained on, and then you look at the number of voice tokens and you think about the informational content on the voice tokens outside of just the words, the timbre of the voice, the speed, the emotion, and do you sometimes think that there are not enough voice tokens to train on? Do you want a larger corpus of voice tokens to train on? Is that something that is useful?
I mean, I could talk about this for a while. I'll probably keep it kind of brief. I would say that there's really, really good text speech equivalents, and so I think you're right in that the existing corpora are dominated by text, like absolutely dominated by text, but you can get quite good speech performance with like a small amount of very, very high quality data. And so like what the internet has, like there's just a lot of bulk data, for in text and stuff like that allows a lot of things. But like for speech, like there's not the same amount of bulk data, but there are other approaches that one can take. And I think people have also found that training on just speech data as like Moshi did in their original like approach. Like there's much less information to be gleaned out of speech data, by itself versus text data. So that can be quite challenging.
Interesting.
Last one. Well, if you have one more, Prakash, go for it. I was going to ask one somewhat topic changer to maybe close on, but you can go first.
So my daughters have tried singing with GPT. And so it's been one of the big challenges. They're like, because they get into the conversation, and the moment they get into the conversation, like all kids, like within like 10 minutes, they're like, let's sing a song together, and fail. So what is going on with that? Or is it a rights thing? Is it like, just difficult? Is it not something that to be focused on? Is it too playful? Like what's going on?
I mean, I think that I probably can't get into too many details here, but there are issues with singing, especially singing like existing works, and so like our models have been basically informed that like they shouldn't do this sort of behavior. There are certain songs like Happy Birthday that like you can get it to sing. You can also get it to sing some other things. You may find that it's singing is maybe more atonal than you would expect. And so you're not the first one to mention this. We don't have anything to announce now, but like, we hope we can do more things like this in the future though.
Nathan.
Thank you for spending the time with us and giving us another chance to demo Q. I wanted to just give you a chance to talk a little bit about your son's recent accomplishment. Founder of Etched, just raised a bunch of money, accelerating inference. What's your proud dad perspective on those developments, and what's your real-time technologist perspective on those developments?
Okay, I mean, like they've done an amazing job. Doing a startup is hard, and Gavin and the team have managed to do just about everything right. It's quite incredible, like how far they come. It's really just like the right product at the right time. Like this demand for inference is enormous, and having this purpose-built ASIC for this chip and rack and overall sort of full system for doing like inference at 10x solution versus like the existing solutions. The way I think about it is like everybody loves like someone selling dollars for 10 cents. Like they've got an amazing product, and I think they're going to do amazingly well. From the real-time perspective, it's like, hey, if we could get our tokens 10 times as fast, like that just turns into lower latency, more smoothness, like better reasoning, like all at the same cost. Like when can we have it? So shut up and take my money. I guess speaking for myself. But, yeah.
Indeed. Cool. Anything else you would want to leave us with? Any other tips or tricks for developers that you think are underappreciated, or just anything else you think we should have asked that we didn't?
I mean, I just say that, hey, we're excited about like, the reaction that we've had to like what we feel is like going to be like the next architecture for real-time interactions, which is voice, but will be more than voice in the future. Like we're seeing this like the adoption on mobile, we're seeing the adoption on ChatGPT desktop, and we're really excited about the API that we're going to put this into people's hands very soon. And seeing like just talking with a bunch of these developers who've been trying it, like the various use cases that they're working with, and they're all sort of saying, oh, it just like it just is much more powerful, like sounds much better, and like I think that's going to be a big moment of letting people kind of like take this in a lot of different directions.
Amazing. We look forward to using it too.
Thanks for being with us, Justin, on AI in the AM. It's been fun.
Prakash, Nathan, thanks for having me. See you later.
Keep up the good work.
Bye.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's awesome. I mean, I did one of those long rambles a couple weeks ago and I ended up spending the whole afternoon outside just walking around, it's a beautiful day. Every so often, I would just, pop open the voice mode and start talking. And, as regular listeners know, I've got a lot of different thoughts going a lot of different directions. So it's amazing to have that, kind of just spaghetti mind dump translated into structured form, actionable things that then we can, launch as individual threads and advance, start or advance projects. This has been, as one of my big indicators for AI success this year is, am I getting away from the desk more? Am I getting outside more? Am I getting more exercise? And voice mode is really, really good for enabling that while still making me feel like I can go out and enjoy this natural walk. But when a thought strikes, I can capture it and I can get it moving immediately. Mm-hmm. That is just so awesome. And I'm putting miles on the shoes as a result.
Are you, so let me ask you a question. Are you using, when you're out and about walking, you're using ChatGPT or Claude?
It depends on exactly what I'm doing. Because I am, I do have a pretty Claude first agent set up at home. I do have Codex running too. So, Claude will delegate, especially more like coding intensive stuff, to Codex. So if it's a kind of clear delegation type move that I want to make, then I'll pull up my own little agent, custom comms thing and just dictate into that, and that just goes into a thread, and it kind of gets handled in the same way that it would have been handled if I was giving it text. If I'm trying to learn something, that's when the real time is definitely the obvious go-to. Maybe I'm loading papers into it, or even just walking around and asking questions about my surroundings in Tokyo, or whatever's on my mind. Real time is awesome for that. And yeah, in between, I'm not sure that I have a very sharp line for kind of where I draw the difference. But those long rambling things have come so far too. I used to be so frustrated by the interruptions because I'll get to these, just like I kind of just did. I'll get to these stopping thinking points and go silent. And it used to interrupt me and throw my, right when I was kind of thinking the hardest about what I next wanted to say would be when I'd get interrupted and distracted. And that problem is really so much better that it actually is becoming for me a constructive thought partner that's not stepping on my toes all the time, but, can be more, just smoothly supportive. So I'd say I'm shifting the long rambles from a pure dictation, because I used to be so frustrated by that constant interruption, to now the real time is handling it quite well. And I'm going there more often with that. But it still kind of depends. If it's just a couple ideas and I want to delegate them quickly, that could just be still a dictation. But real time voice is getting more and more of my talking to AI share for sure.
I often find on Codex in particular, when you use it, it does this thinking thing where you talk to it and then it goes off and it checks, what it has on that. And I often find that it does a lot of checking. So it's almost like every response is basically a thinking, and then it goes and checks something out, and then it comes back to you. And that, for me, kind of killed its usage within the first week or so. I was I don't like it. It just became very difficult for me, because I was I would rather just address the problem immediately and get to the solution, because during the thinking part, my mind starts wandering, and I'm I start thinking about the next step. And it's very hard for me to not do that kind of linear flow. And I want to get to the end of the problem and finish off and move on to something else. And so I feel the having to multitask between agents is a critical skill right now. I think having to, stop a job, stop somewhere halfway through a thought process, switch to another active thread, continue that and give the agent feedback, then switch back. And then that kind of multitasking, managerial multitasking is tough. And it's also detracts from your kind of deep work. So I think that's a very different it's a very different skill set for the average, I think, programmer. Like programmers like to drill, right? Like it be inflow, drill through the task, watch it complete. And I think it's difficult to do halfway, tell someone to do something, go somewhere else, look at what they did, kind of catch up on the context that they had. And my Codex is a mess now. I have hundreds of threads. I don't know which ones are still open. And I just use the priority. There's a priority thing on the side that you can see which ones were the ones that you spoke to most recently. And I just use that most of the time because it's very hard for me to keep track of which threads. And I also like to keep the threads open for a long time. I feel like, the compaction is good enough. And sometimes if I need something else that happened in the beginning of the thread, I can kind of go back and take a look at it. So I have these endless threads. I have no idea whether any of this is efficient or, I sometimes feel that it actually probably detracts a little bit from productivity to have so many different threads. So you kind of feel like you're working on many things, but it's actually you're working slowly on a bunch of things. So I don't know. There's these pros, these cons. Yeah, I just wish that everything would go faster and more smoothly, I guess. I guess that's a good thing for inference.
Yeah, as you're describing this, I mean, the problem certainly resonates. I've got, at any given time, a dozen tabs open in a terminal to deal with Claude, and then I'm constantly coming back and being like, what was going on here? And tried a few different things and they've kind of built this in a little bit more natively over time, but initially they didn't seem to have great kind of tab titling or summaries.
Mm-hmm.
So I had created a hook for myself that was just every so often, after however many turns, not like every tool call, but every end tool calls, update the title. So if I hover over it, I'll see what's going on now, and then also put a kind of current state little gray text at the bottom, and that helps. But I'm kind of thinking audio might really help with that even more, and I'm kind of thinking maybe I should have different voices for different threads, so I can kind of use the part of my brain that understands how a single voice represents a single single entity, and then have hopefully snap back into the context of the conversation that I had with that voice. I'd be pretty interested to see if I could get that to allow me to context switch a lot more effectively, because it is tough a lot of times when I go to a different tab. The overall look is the same, it's just a bunch of black text, gray text, kind of whatever the most recent steps were, and then a little summary at the bottom. And it's okay, what the hell was going on here? Reorienting to that can be taxing. But if I could get a voice, that was just oh, I remember that voice and what we were talking about. I don't know how well that will work, but it could be a pretty effective little trick. So as always, we'll point our agent at the transcript of our conversation and see if we can get some improvement out of it. That'll be interesting to experiment with.
So just to switch gears a little bit, Stripe just announced that they have closed the acquisition of OpenRouter. For those not familiar, OpenRouter is basically a service that supplies you with a single API key, and with that API key, you can use any model that you want to. So you're not restricted. They have agreements with Anthropic, with OpenAI, with every single inference provider. And so you don't have this kind of switching cost that you normally have. You can basically just embed the OpenRouter API or SDK in your app, and then you can switch very easily switch between services. And what they are saying is that you probably can't see this that well, but what they're saying is that it's the singularity, it's fuzzy and perhaps already overworked term, but we decided that January 1st marked the beginning of the singularity, and we have since been operating on that basis. In our case, we simply saw a large inflection in long-run trends, for example, a huge increase in the rate of new firm creation. And we decided that we ought to take that phase change seriously. Besides that, they quickly said, zooming out, we see capital and intelligence are becoming the two digital flows undergirding every business. Up until now, every developer has needed a straightforward and reliable way to manage their revenue pipeline, and serving this need gave the rise to Stripe. Going forward, however, every developer will also need a straightforward and reliable way to manage their intelligence pipeline. And that observation first led us to OpenRouter. OpenRouter has built the world's largest and most trusted token routing engine, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We have seen the parallels between managing intelligence and managing capital directly in our own products, et cetera. So that is what they're saying. I will take a step back here, and I will note that I have often compared the entire AI space to kind of a generalization of capital. I've often said, for example, that in the 20th century, China struggled with the idea of capitalism, market capitalism, which was ceding their power over the economy to the market itself, which was a information architecture. And AI is in a sense the information architecture of the internet, and it is ceding control of your information diet and control over information to the internet at large. And that is going to be I think the big struggle of the 21st century is about ceding this idea of like human disempowerment is really this idea of like letting the information flows kind of drive decision making across humanity as a whole, directed decision making with models at play, and kind of ceding that space. And it's funny to see Stripe kind of go in there and say like, well, we have capital flows and we have intelligence flows, and we're going to acquire this company that is at the center of intelligence flows right now.
They do have some real, I could see this being an incredibly compelling package for developers because spend is a mess. That's definitely a real problem. And it is becoming a huge issue for a lot of companies. So to be able to even just get really good clarity into what is going on spend-wise across a wide range of providers, you can get pretty good visibility from just a couple providers if that's all you care to use. But to go beyond that, it is pretty tough to make sense of all that still, I would say. And Stripe clearly, has the DNA. And I think OpenRouter's also done a pretty good job of it already. But Stripe will have incredible strength when it comes to making that really clear and making it something you can optimize against and also just not have to rebuild. So many. I did an episode of the podcast with I forget her last name. Emily is her first name, who leads AI at Stripe, and she was talking about their payments foundation model. But one of the other interesting things that she said along the way was just use Stripe as your database for everything financial. Don't try to mirror it. That just ends up causing more. You're just making work for yourself. You're not going to be better than we are. The uptime is ridiculous. The intent. Basically you can't beat us at any of this stuff. So you might as well just build directly on top of it. And I think made that mistake myself at one point in the past. Certainly when they were less proven than they are today. But in retrospect, I should have just had API calls to Stripe be the way that we got this information rather than trying to store it all and dig around in our own database for it. I think they've really earned that trust, and when they can bring that to AI spend in a similarly trustworthy way, I think that will really be a very valuable piece of overall architectures that people will like just find pretty compelling and kind of naturally adopt. So I would see them being able to not control, but to at least have really good visibility into like a pretty significant share of overall intelligence, because that observability that they can provide and the robustness that they've demonstrated they can provide is incredible shortcut from a developer standpoint, no doubt about it.
It does strike me that, it always like, okay, so number one, I feel like kind of May to October is like the seasonal AI doldrums. And every May to October, we go through this like, oh, AI is not really working kind of cycle. And then I feel like just before Thanksgiving, the companies do their last push for product for the end of the year. And then they drop the product that's going to define the rest of the next year. So I feel like it is clear to me as a frontier lab, you don't want to be competing on token cost. And the entire game is to figure out how you can not compete on token cost and how you can compete on like the value that it provides. And there are a few ways to do that. I think one way that is emerging is probably speed. So offering higher speed services, meaning that you go through more tokens, but much quicker. And you can see OpenAI heading through its Cerebrus with that. Is one way because some people just want the job done, and this is a way that you can define that you are delivering enough value that this person is willing to pay more for it. So I think that just just increasing speed, same margin on the tokens, and just dumping more tokens out. I think that's one way. But the other I feel is like it's going to be going from tokens to kind of maybe digital employees. I've been talking about this for a while, like going towards this idea of a digital employee that you hire and is like capable and of doing multiple things that you don't have to contextualize, which has a persistent memory. You can kind of see that already in our experiences with, I think, our personal codexes and Claudes. They have some memory and they have some, context of what we've been doing on multiple projects, etc. But they need a lot more, I think. I wonder if that's the end point that we're about to see in like the next couple of months. I think OpenAI is nearing the release of Astra. Anthropic is heading towards Fable 5.1, I hear, is the next release. Both, I think, should be out this month. But I feel very strongly like that they have to stop competing on token prices, because it's something that exposes them to direct comparison. And I feel like the moment you don't want to be in a situation where you have your API and your API has to compete on evals for every single company separately. And the moment you're like 2% down on the evals, they switch, right? Which is where OpenRouter is really at. And I also wonder, I have had these experiences with OpenRouter where things are not what they seem. So I think I detailed this. I tried to use base 10 for GLM 5.2. And what I found was that base 10 doesn't do things in order. So it doesn't like, okay, if you ask within a single call, if you ask for name, address, it sometimes goes address and name. And if you expected that, let's say you generate a Chinese name, you should have a China address. And it goes and like, it puts in an address first and it puts an American address, and then it decides to give you an American name instead, right? Like it will do stuff like this. So I wonder, to what extent these tokens are really fungible. I don't think they are even fungible now. And I feel like to the extent they are fungible, they're going to be fungible on the lower value things like the categorization, classification, like stuff that you could have done with, if you had time to code, you could have coded something with existing Python, language tools. And instead you ended up using a frontier model for no reason. And then now you're dropping from frontier to a GLM 5.2. Is that really significant? So I don't know. I feel like it's great that OpenRouter exists. It's great that multiple providers exist, but I'm not sure how really meaningful it is for as competition to the frontier labs.
Well, I think the frontier labs are doing just fine and will continue to do just fine. Their margins seem to be improving from the reporting that seems most credible to me. It seems like their finances are looking great, and yet, I mean, my general rule of thumb for like where are things highly swappable, or where are tokens fungible? They're not necessarily fungible, but like where are switching costs low and where are switching costs high, or just the narrower it is, the lower your switching costs, because you can actually define what you want, measure, and if you're in an environment where you're controlling the inputs through some means, then you can be like pretty confident you can switch things over. If you're doing something like I'm doing on my laptop, where it's like whatever idea comes to mind at any given time, I'm going to like throw that directly into the model, then I would not expect that you're going to get similar performance from anything other than the top tier. But I just did an episode with Flo Crivello from Lindy, and they are offering now Lindy Teammate, which is marketed exactly as you described, as a virtual teammate, and it's powered by DeepSeek. And his whole thing was like, you can't believe the amount of work we had to do this. It was, he's like, we were ready for so long. We had unbelievable test suites and, all the different use cases that are common for us. And at one point, they even, with an earlier open source model, they had determined that their evals had basically been passed. But then they launched whatever the alternative open source model was at the time. And the response from their user base was, Lindy got stupid. I don't know what happened, but it's stupid now. And they were like, oh, I guess the evals didn't cover as much as we thought. So they've got to the point now where they're confident that they can offer a virtual employee with a DeepSeek backing. He told me they subsidize a lot of context ingestion and processing, and a lot of what they do is in that initial onboarding where it's just sucking up all the information and trying to get ready to have the depth of context that's needed to actually do a decent job as a virtual employee. I thought it was pretty remarkable that they were able to get there with DeepSeek at all, because they do have a lot of different customers, a lot of use cases. And I'm sure there's still some corners of the overall platform where things are not quite as good as they would be, but the cost pressure is real. He was kind of saying it's a small percentage of the cost compared to what it used to be, and so for him to compete with Claude Tag at all, he feels like he can't possibly do it with Claude as the model. He's got to have a different model, or it's just not going to work. So. Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
it's such a similar story to Cursor, in the sense that Cursor was buying, Anthropic API, and then Anthropic started competing with them, and they can't compete with Anthropic while using Anthropic. So then they
certainly not with the price discrimination that continues to go on. I mean, Flo's a very libertarian personality. And even he was kind of like, again, this is I think this is a pretty interesting framework that I've been coming back to more and more. What would the government do if it was trying to act like a tech platform? I credit two professors, Angela Zhang from USC is one, and her husband, whose name I am forgetting at the moment, but they're working on developing this thesis that basically the Chinese government has kind of taken on tech platform sort of status. And all their companies are kind of built on the social platform that the government provides. And I'm kind of like, what could we learn from that? What's the sort of government as platform with American characteristics that would make sense for us? And one that he was willing to endorse, despite being a pretty dyed-in-the-wool libertarian, was some restrictions on price discrimination by the frontier companies to try to create a more level playing field for the app layer, because at a 10-to-1 price discrimination ratio, it's just really hard for them to compete. And so that's, for now, he's been forced to DeepSeek. If, the price were the same, he could maybe come back. But
this is the thing that has always annoyed me, because like Sam Altman does this thing where he's like, oh, we had the API out for a long time, but until we did ChatGPT, no one else had thought to do it. And I'm like, dude, at the pricing that you guys were doing, we're selling the GPT-3 API at, anyone doing ChatGPT at that pricing would be, like hundreds of millions of dollars in the hole. And even when OpenAI itself did it, it was hundreds of millions of dollars in the hole, because it was a free research preview at first. So I think it's actually like fairly disingenuous to say that. Even now, it's obvious for the app layer companies what kind of apps will succeed. The digital employee, for example, is something that we know is going to happen. It also takes me back to Leopold Aschenbrenner's like situational awareness, pre-situational awareness interview with Dwarkesh, where he said, yeah, you guys will just schlep. And after you schlep, like we will just have the next, level of model, and that model will just kill all of the schlepping that you did. So I think I feel like that's really the ball game. Like you have expensive API and new capability that can be wrapped. A bunch of app layer companies spring up to wrap that layer. And then the API pricing starts to drop. And as the API pricing starts to drop, the model company looks at which app companies have done well, Sherlock's, the features that it wants from them, puts it, on the model layer, embeds some of it in the model layer itself, and does a little bit of feature creation for stuff which is not yet in the model layer, a little bit of schlepping, and puts it out there. I'm, not sure what's the solution, except it's great that we have multiple model companies, Frontier Labs. So even if we don't see competition at the app layer, even if the app layer is getting Sherlocked, the Frontier Labs themselves are fighting with each other and are forced to kind of manage. And I guess they are pricing at what they're pricing at a level such that all of the GPU capacity that they have is occupied. I guess that's the pricing metric that they use. All GPUs have to be occupied. And what ended up happening at Anthropic is all of the GPUs were occupied at the pricing level that they had determined, and they had excess demand. So they walked into SpaceX and they bought capacity on SpaceX at 10 times the price of market. So from $3 an hour for B200s to $30 to $50 an hour for B200s. And then they are still making money because they're charging like 80 to 90 bucks per. So I think that's like 30x. So they have a 90 plus percent margin, 95, 97% margin. And then it still made sense for them to pay Google they paid Google enough that Google decided its TPUs were not for Gemini, in the insanity of the pricing that Anthropic offered to both Google and SpaceX.
You know what? I think another thing that could be pretty interesting in terms of an enabler for startups with this OpenRouter Stripe combination is you could potentially see it becoming much easier to bring usage-based pricing to all sorts of products. This has been a huge challenge, I think, for a lot of startups where they're like, okay, I want to give somewhat of a free trial of some kind, right? Like you're used to that in the no marginal cost SaaS game. Sign up, try it free for X days or what have you. But when you have real AI costs attached to that, it's tough. So then what do? Do you like eat some of that cost and try to convert those users, or do you try to what a lot of people are doing is trying to figure out some subscription price point that will work, but you have some users that you're losing money on, and others are subsidizing, cross-subsidizing. That is definitely, we're nowhere near an optimal state, I would say, in that regard. And you could imagine things getting pretty easy here, where all of a sudden you could say like, hey, you can try our product for free. Just pay for your token usage for the first 7 days. And then at 7 days or whatever, then you can like subscribe to our thing at kind of a low, price that's still like basically all margin for the app. And you still just pay for your token usage. I mean, it opens up a lot more opportunity. That is super gnarly to do, especially if you're, running model changers and all that kind of stuff. But if Stripe can make that all super easy for you, where you can just see with a simple indicator, like this is the account that is using this inference call, and they handle all of the billing to that user's credit card, I could see dramatic simplification and like a lot of different ways that companies could present to customers that could be really advantageous.
So speaking of exactly that, this morning, OpenAI and Replit announced a deal. Replit free mode powered by OpenAI's GPT 5.6 Luna. So Luna is their, I think, Sonnet equivalent. It's their lowest model, fastest, cheapest. It is what is running our.
I think haiku equivalent.
A haiku equivalent. It's their fast, cheap model.
They have Terra in between.
Exactly. And it is what is running our headlines, chirons. It's what runs our titling system.
We have Luna to thank for personalized cancer earlier in the show.
Yeah. So and I guess the structure of this deal is Replit is paying kind of bulk pricing to OpenAI. OpenAI is basically selling like pure kind of open weight inference level, but in bulk, right? So they're probably matching, bulk pricing for inference, and they're managing the entire inference backend. And Replit gets to basically give them a subscription fee and have that as their free mode. And probably they get a revenue share of new subscriptions, something like that. So some combination. And this is a way that I think the frontier labs can kind of differentiate themselves. You have this kind of OpenAI inside kind of concept. I've always thought like the next step is branding, right? Like once you have multiple products which don't have clear differentiation, competing products, the next thing that you do is branding. And so this is going to be Replit free mode with OpenAI inside, right? And I think that is going to be a thing. As long as they're selling, even the inference providers are making, hefty margins. So as long as they can sell at the same price as inference for open weights plus some margin, I think it probably makes sense for them, and they can secure volume. So I guess we're going down this volume and brand name game for the mass market, And just as you pointed out, just exactly as you pointed out, in the sense that, you have this kind of bulk pricing.
Yeah, that's cool. I saw Michele from Replit say that Luna was the closest they had seen to intelligence too cheap to be metered, and now here they are, free Replit. Pretty cool. I mean, Replit I've been a huge fan of for a long time, even going back before AI coding, just because they've done such an amazing job of creating a really accessible virtual machine that you can just log into from your browser. The ease and accessibility of it, and the ability to kind of have a computer working in the cloud that you can share in a way that feels like a Google Doc. I think it's just amazing. But some of the friction that I have run into with them over time has been they've had to figure out ways to kind of convert people to paid, right? Because they're like, they do have real costs. And so they've had, I think, some ways of limiting sharing that have been definitely suboptimal over time. I've given some feedback on it, but this sounds like the beginning of maybe a new era where sharing can be a lot more free on the platform again. And that, I'm sure they hated that too, because it was definitely limiting their growth in some ways. But yeah, now if I can share with an account that has free Luna to, make whatever little changes they want to make to the app that we're handing off, I'm again bullish on Replit.
A lot of developers are actually like, who uses Replit? And I will tell you a story. I have a friend who is the CTO of a mid-size e-commerce company. And he says all of his product managers now bring in Replit demos immediately for features. And they do not ask the tech team to kind of code features. And that's usually like a 3-month-long process of trying to get a developer internally to kind of focus on your project and to build out a feature demo. Now it's like instantaneous. All product managers use Replit, and they kind of build out the feature and they demo the feature during the meeting, and you can immediately see it and decide whether or not it's deployed to production or not. So that is what Replit has done, especially because they integrate it inside the security stack of the company. And that is one of the major things. So it's really a tool for PMs to become developers and not developers to like develop on their own, which is, I think, the key differentiation that they have.
Yeah, it's a clear case of developers having, I remember this poem from high school that we were assigned where the one line was, "The burnt child loves the flame." And I feel like that describes developers with respect to spinning up new development environments. Like somehow they've learned to love the incredibly painful nature of it. And for everybody else, it's like, I just want to go to a URL and get something that I can code in and share. And they really do have an incredibly good flow for that. So it's confused me many times why developers have not seen the value in it as quickly as I think they should. But 3 Christmas presents last year that I coded on Replit. So it's even just for hobbyists. Like I made my dad a little app to test his stock trading theories with a little back testing. I made my mom a travel app to plan her trips and find the gluten-free bakeries and whatever else, other idiosyncratic things she needs along the way. And then I made my wife a event simulator for events that she organizes, that literally has, little people wandering around in a grid that simulates the space and, tries to figure out like how they should optimize different parameters of their event to drive the outcomes they want. All that vibe coded on Replit, and you just hand it off to somebody and be like, by the way, you can also extend this app. You just prompt the Replit agent to do it, and you can have your own little tweaks. You're not like fixed forever in what I've done for you. I think it's pretty cool.
Indeed. I'm looking forward to the voice getting better. And well, it's been another day in AI. And this week has worked well for us so far.
Yeah, it's been fun. Always cool to be improving. I'm glad we were able to bring Q up on stage with us a little bit today. And maybe something else we can think about is a dial-in with it. The PR folks at RAND said, "Is there a phone number she could dial into?" And I said, "No, there's not yet, but it might be a prompt or two away." So
shouldn't be too difficult, I think. So
iterative self-improvement continues.
Iterative self-improvement does continue. Indeed.
All righty. See you tomorrow, Prakash.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.